much. I really appreciate it. It's wonderful to be here. And I just wanted to say that we are not strictly a nonprofit. We're actually an impact for profit. So I don't want to, sort of frighten off our current investors and our prospective investors, but that's the world we're kind of living in right now. And part of the discussion that we'll have that I'll dive into now is really also about finance and the necessity to understand how these tools can help unlock, hopefully, the right kind of finance to see these sort of communities get built at a greater scale. So I thought what I would do is I'll just share my screen here and dig into things a bit. As mentioned, I come from a background of game design and software development, as well as 16, 17 years prior to coming to Stanford on case study research of organic, biodynamic, small plot family farms, which then turned into research on intentional communities and eco-villages and co-housing and collaboratives, and just a really beautiful place to be, just like here with this rebuild community. You just find yourself surrounded by these lovely personalities of people who care deeply about people and the planet and indigenous wisdom. And I'm unabashedly a foodie. Okay, I love to eat. I love to cook. I've always been excited about artisanal ingredients, especially organic and biodynamic ingredients. And so I think you'll get a theme here, quite a bit, recurring theme, that Regen Villages is really about place, but it's also about answering for as much of the base Maslow hierarchical needs that we can go after. So talking about technology, and understanding 10 years ago was really the birth of Regen Villages research initiative at Stanford. I had come to campus with this idea of the sort of neighborhood scale as opposed to the smart home individual typology scale. And that was sort of the birth of this concept of how we could look at natural resource flows through the lens of technology. But 10 years ago, it was a predictive conversation, right, about what was going to come in terms of AI and machine learning and robotics and these kinds of actuations and interventions. So before then, we knew that the tech wasn't really there yet. So what we could do was what we could do, which was actually cut our teeth on the mechanical engineering side of things, which was really the genesis of what I'll be talking about here in terms of now what the machine learning software is up to. In any case, I want to really start on a topic that's really important and near and dear to this call today and to this summit, which is about regeneration, right? And it's really this study away from entropy towards syntropy, right? That the flow of things and circularity has an opportunity to have multiple uses where the output of some systems could actually be the input of others. And when you look at especially revived ecosystems and areas, the previous talk was about listening to the land, for instance, which is really quite lovely. That you can understand that as you set the circumstances for this kind of activity, that Mother Earth will throw her arms around you. She'll embrace you and create healing. There'll be a healing of systems and services. And why is that important? Well, it's important because we want to live with access and agency to our natural resource flows. I say this often: we have never been more disassociated from our natural world than we are now. And that's a frightening thing. So we want to be able to find solutions that are easy for the average person, family, community to dive into, to be closer, to live within nature, not separate from it. In any case, the kernel of the Regen Villages research, started at Stanford, as I mentioned, back in 2012, when I come to join what's called the Solar Decathlon competition, which is who could build the most energy positive single family home context. And it's flat pack. You have about 18 months in the design phase, but only 2 weeks to build on a designated location around the world. The house has to be fully functional. It has to be flat packed, shipped, built on site within 2 weeks, as I mentioned. But then at the end of the exhibition, the house has to be deconstructed, flat packed, shipped back to campus, rebuilt, and someone has to be able to live in it. So it has to be a really functional home. And that's great. And there's a certain state of the art over the last 18, 19 years that the competition has been continuing about passive home design, which I think is fantastic. But my kind of fly in the ointment to this cohort was essentially, I believe that a smart house inside of a dumb neighborhood doesn't make much sense, and that we could actually create a sentient neighborhood infrastructure. And what does that mean, right? Be sentient and have a neighborhood that is accepting of these passive home typologies. And they're agnostic in terms of architecture. It could be a geoship, which are beautiful. It could be, any kind of myriad of architectural design, so long as it meets passive, requirements from our perspective. And we can talk more about that in a bit in terms of what passive actually means in terms of building materials, earthen circular building materials, but also how a home is positioned and constructed so that it is essentially a power plant. But I was really inspired in the early to mid 1990s by the work of Dr. Suzanne Simard from the University of British Columbia, who lovingly coined the term the Wood Wide Web instead of the World Wide Web. And the story has it that she was walking through the forest in the Pacific Northwest, and her dog actually fell into an old miner's outhouse hole about 8 feet down. And as they were, feverishly digging to get the dog out, and they rescued the dog, fortunately, she stumbled upon this incredible mycelial, mycorrhizal bundle threads inoculated, underneath, the forest floor. And she was impassioned to try to trace and track what was going on with these systems. So what she found was that underneath the forest floor is a electrochemically signaled communication platform. I call it really Mother Earth's first crypto, because essentially it is a ledger. It's a ledger that is going on of a have-need network of carbon, mineral, sugar, nitrogen, phosphorus, whatever those elements might be, those goodies. And there's a have-need sort of hand-raising activity going on. And these elements are then brokered and ledgered and sent across, vast distances. What's amazing about these mycelial bundles is they're single organisms that are quite large. They can span roughly 200, 250 radial kilometers, gigantic, but they don't have a central brain. They're smart, but they have intelligence at the point of sensing. And at each sensing point, they're able to share that information across the wider network. So it learns as it grows and it's doing what it's doing. And I thought, well, gosh, that's sort of the biomimicry model that we wanted to consider building, our Village OS software from. This idea of machine learning that could mimic a mycelial network. And that's really what we're on about here. There's been some other amazing examples of sort of fungal inoculation in terms of master planning. This is a map of the Tokyo rail system where they use slime mold. They place dots of sugar on a map and essentially release the slime mold. The dots of sugar represent density, population density. And then the slime mold actually does quite a brilliant job of creating the most logical path to those dots of sugar. And it's really quite informative. This is just another example of the U.S. highway system where again, the slime mold is used to create a predictive model, if you will. But I think it's really important to look at the neural network of these threads that are ever expanding in a kind of, sort of fractal, Fibonacci sort of way, right? And it's always looking for ways to improve, ways to get more for the benefit of the network. Yes, itself, but also for the network. So I think that's quite empowering to then imagine neighborhood scale infrastructure, right? And we talk specifically about neighborhoods because we think that we have to be looking more and more at sort of the village scale and the retrofit of village scale before we can start really thinking about smart cities, right? So it's a whole other topic really to talk about in terms of urban infill, which we look at as well. But imagine really that we can inform models, machine learning models on the regenerative and resilient framework of where the output of one system becomes the input of another across these diverse resource flows: clean water, renewable energy, high yield organic food production, which is a complete afterthought for the most part of most urban planning, master planning, waste to resource management, turning those things into asset classes. And then, having an agnostic middle layer of software that's capable of modeling just about anything in the known universe, but specifically related to village operations, whether it's smart mobility, whether it's an economic ledger, whether it is other kinds of patterns and things happening around the community that also affect the community, and vice versa. So there's quite a lot, in other words, in terms of complexity. But this is the sweet spot for machine learning. This is the sweet spot for using algorithms to consider from a compassionate, altruistic, empathic, mindful perspective how we can live within nature, not separate from it, and in more flourishing ways. And moreover, that the software and the machine learning that's continuing, right, to look at these previously siloed infrastructure pieces and start to explore and expose, unknown, previously unknown relationships, right? So essentially, a water system can understand the why and the when of certain things in relation to the power system or waste system, and that these relationships can grow and build on this knowledge of each other, which in many ways, honestly, our natural world already does. I mean, there's a signaling that happens in nature that informs, other diverse folks in that ecosystem to kind of get engaged. So we have to be really good listeners and observers of these kinds of flows and systems. So that's the sort of the background, if you will, on how we got to this place to create a platform, and that's what we're developing now and making really great progress on our coding of this at this point. We filed some provisional patents on the model, again, because of the fact that we're an impact for profit company. But rest assured, we are also working on open APIs, application program interfaces that can connect to the Village OS, and eventually, once we achieve some terminal value for our investors, we will open source the whole thing. That's really our goal. But in any case, the concept of the Village OS is quite simple, which is to look at how we can use generative design, machine learning, to virtually create and imagine a neighborhood based on place, geospatial data, architectural data, engineering data, climate relevant to that location, and then an iterative process with the key stakeholders in a simple game-like way, right? That enables them, like SimCity, SimVillage, to toggle their interests and get to not only higher fidelity, but then to planning approvals. The second part of the software is once a neighborhood is built or a retrofit has been implemented, that the VillageOS software lives inside that community as a local server, as an edge computer that essentially is a digital twin to continuously be aware of how it can improve or mitigate against risk, or where it could be modeling and suggesting new components, right? Without having the expense of actually implementing those things. You can really just model them and see how they might work. And that's really exciting because you can look at all those different kinds of products and services, and there's so much emerging right now. There's so much exciting technology in terms of organic biodynamic farming interventions that are robotic and robotic assisted, just by one way of example, or GeoShip, for instance, in terms of the built environment, in terms of cladding, or in terms of design thinking, lots of different opportunities to model. So from a design perspective, I call it essentially food-related, a lasagna of layers, right? So geospatial data is comprised of these multiple layers of information. A lot of it is open source. Some of it requires some additional kinds of exploration, whether it's boots on the ground or satellite imagery or whatever it may be. But you start to really compile a lot of information about the place. Of course, the topography, the geology, the hydrology. There is of course, the parcels, the zoning, political aspect of it. Then there's the demographics, the land cover, but there are these other components which geospatial data typically doesn't consider, but we will, and we are going to, and that's something that we're working on now, which is indigenous wisdom. We feel it's critically important that these stories are incorporated and are ingested and are understood, that and whether it comes to wildlife corridors or the way rivers flow, or however the indigenous wisdom may sort of surface, the concept really is that the land speaks to us, sort of germane to the previous session, right? The land has a voice, and we can use machine learning to allow that land to actually say something to us. I think it's really interesting and exciting. And then really that the VillageOS starts to insert these initially primitive shapes of village, of buildings, of systems, of services that enable people to start to see what's possible on that land or in that retrofit scenario. And then we get into this amazing iteration loop, right? Landowner could be an aging farmer, small plot developer, perhaps development company, real estate development company, local regional government, especially. Then you've got the adjoining community members, other interested parties, and even people involved in finance, that they can all be together in the same virtual sandbox and be able to, for the first time, very easily understand what's being discussed on a particular parcel of land, but moreover, that they can toggle their interests very easily and objectives. And by playing a sort of kind of game-like environment with moving things around and suggesting different things, that they're kind of leaving a digital footprint, a fingerprint themselves on that plan, where they feel like their voice is heard. And by doing that, we imagine that this will really reduce the rhetoric in the planning process, which is really, really important. The other part is that we look at creating a platform, to be perfectly honest, that allows the average layperson to create a master plan, a spatial plan, where they don't need the skills necessarily to be an architect, an engineer, a planner, all those expensive consultants. The typical planning process literally can cost between €1.5 to 2 million or dollars. And it's a fixed book master plan, typically. It's inflexible. And moreover, it's a situation, unfortunately, where those clients, those service providers don't really care whether or not your project comes to fruition or not. They're in business to extract cash from you. And then they'll move on to the next project, et cetera. Of course, if it does come to fruition, it's great, but it's not like it's their objective, right? They have different objectives. So imagine that we can reduce that cost initially to maybe 1,500 or 2,000 euro to get to a blueprint. That's game changing. That's going to absolutely be game changing in terms of how regional government, typically the seat of power, can look at realigning whole areas through this regenerative resilient lens. And then also unlock those landowners and those developers to do the right kinds of developments, more rapidly. Then, as I mentioned before, on the operate side, when we get to an implemented village, the concept really is that the algorithms are there for us in support of human and planetary flourishing. We think those are really good objectives, by the way, for machine learning. So we can talk more about that. But by way of example, this is a 25-hectare, 60-acre Benelux, if you will, piece of farmland, currently zoned, handcuffed, agricultural only. But imagine, if you will, that the software through the Village OS could essentially design a 400-home neighborhood on that 60 acres, 25-hectare, where 1/3 or less is attributed to social affordable housing density, right? That's another key trigger for us. So apartments, row houses, townhomes, condominiums, some smaller sort of villa, semi-detached, kind of dwellings. But for the most part, it's really about the right kind of density on this land, where 2/3 of the open space is designed around permaculture. It's using machine learning to understand that climate relevant area, what the land, we said before, indigenous wisdom wise, is capable of, and being able to express that in a form that is bioproductive, artisanally producing ingredients for healthy, happy residents. And of course, overproducing in a way for the adjoining communities and the public goodwill radius. But it's more than just the food, both the soil-based farming and the controlled environment farming. It's also about clean water, water conservation, water harvesting. It's also about waste to resource management, digesting human animal waste into asset classes, which could be biomass, biogas. It can be all the different kind of sort of, like I said before, syntropic ways that you can get that waste digestion working for you. And then, of course, the energy generation across multiple sources for generation through a microgrid that's brokered, and where these neighborhoods, if you sort of get the perspective here, are capable of being islanded for some number of weeks, maybe even longer, depending upon the nature of the land and the technologies that have been implemented. But for the most part, it's really about people feeling safe and safer in terms of their regenerative resiliency. From an urban perspective, we can look at using the Village OS software, block by block in urban areas to regreen and provide what I call regenerative and resilient overlays, right? You're not going to be able to necessarily sort of dramatically rebuild these neighborhoods, but you can block by block explore what's possible in terms of power and water, in terms of food supplementation, and a certain amount of composting and waste digestion. And again, that in case of, and really not a matter of if, but when and how bad some anomaly is going to happen to these urban areas, climate related or whatever, that these communities can be sort of going on, humming along without too much interruption. And that's really the way we have to be thinking now in terms of all new development. And of course, we're not. The status quo is quite strong, as we all know, but we take a Bucky Fuller approach to this, which is, and his famous quote, which is, don't fight, make a new model that makes the old one obsolete. So again, getting back to my roots, if you will, is about food and healthy eating, and really this concept of being able to design around food forests, berms, guilds, swales, complementary kinds of protein sources at the neighborhood scale, doorstep access. You open your door viscerally, you see where your nutrition is coming from. And these are self-healing systems over a period of a number of years, once you've implemented it in the right way. That's quite exciting. Then this idea of marrying the soil-based farming with the controlled environment farming. So looking at aquaponic and aeroponic systems, not hydroponic so much, because those are pretty much like controlled clean room sort of environments. We're really more interested in the community-wide, accessible farming. And so aquaponic and aeroponic systems are much more viable for that. And basically in these systems, by the way, aquaponics is an ancient Asian way of farming where you have ponds and you have the fish waste is actually the nutrients that feed these lattices. The roots are dangling, used typically in bamboo, and the roots are fed this nutrient-rich water, and of course you get a combination of fish protein and cultivation. But in these systems, we have embedded fish tanks, and you have freshwater shrimp, crawfish, several species of freshwater fish. Their waste is ammonia that's converted from nitrites to nitrates. Through a low-energy water pump, it's brought up to these lattices. It trickles and feeds the plants really lovely in a nice way. And then the water comes back to the fish tanks purified. Here in Northern California, where we are, we ran two different tests, one at Stanford and one on a small farm in Marin County, where we were able to prove we could save up to 80% water through this farming technique and almost 1/3 increased yield, biodiverse. Because you get lots of different kinds of cultivars in these greenhouses. And then, of course, what people are capable of growing, next to their home or their apartment through these sort of southern-facing glazed areas, or windowsills, that they can actually also be productive. So you get a picture, right, that there's going to be an overproduction, an abundant surplus of bioavailable nutrition that people can come together around in the community. So one of the other aspects that I think is really important is how do you digest the waste and how you make that a source for the aquaponic systems. And there's this wonderful black soldier fly larvae and aquatic red worms. These lovely little creatures eat their own weight every day in food and animal waste. So they're great digesters, anaerobic digesters. But at the same time, they're then fed to the chickens and the fish and enable a full circularity, because the soldier fly larvae and the aquatic worms are high in omega-3 and fat and calcium. They're wiggling, they're alive. In other words, you're not feeding pellets to these other creatures in your community. And then, of course, you're ingesting that protein, and it's a much higher value for us as well. Getting into the built environment, which I know is really important to this topic, and the concept really for the Village OS is we're architecturally agnostic. Okay, so depending upon where around the world a village is going to be thought of, obviously this kind of Northern European, North American, whatever it is, mass timber, cross-laminated timber, design thinking will be much different in Thailand, for instance, or in sub-Saharan Africa, or in MENA. It's going to have not only a climate-related perspective, but a cultural milieu, information that will be imparted. But the goal is the same. The goal is really creating space where you can have light commercial, you can have light clinical health, dental, you can have shared workspaces, community activities, cultural events. It's to celebrate the passion that community represents. And to build these places, there's a revolution that's been happening the last, I'd say, decade or less in terms of precision construction. This is assembly line, controlled environment construction. These are component and volumetric kinds of things, but also that on site, that these buildings go up much faster. They come to site, they basically snap together. We're also seeing this wonderful renaissance in 3D extrusion and printing a home or a multi-story home in a few days or weeks. And really the goal, again, is to try to create communities that are living within nature, not separate from it, where the built environment is considering all of the aspects of that circular natural resource flow. To look at from a sociological perspective, we've done the research and we understand that there's a lot of people who don't want to be farmers, who don't want to be engineers, who are interested in buying or renting a home and living in a community in one way or another, where they can pay a higher monthly association fee and not have to be, let's say, guilted because they're not involved necessarily. Conversely, through the Village OS software, our goal really is an economic ledger that will allow people through these tasked, ledgered tasks, that they can sign up to do things. As they do them and complete them, their monthly association fees, their rent, their mortgage can be, thus reduced. So it's a really interesting way of brokering what usually can happen in intentional communities, we feel like. And also, it's also proven that you have better health when you're involved in community like this. One of my favorite slides really is this whole idea of communities coming together around, diverse socioeconomic, cultural, racial, ethnic, religious, that food, getting back to food, is the great disarming factor. And basically, it is the one that enables people, even if you don't speak the same language, to come together and break bread and share recipes and stories and laughter and tears and feel healthy and happy, right? Aging in place, it's a critical piece. My current affiliation at Stanford University is actually, we moved through the School of Mechanical Engineering with our research. Now I'm in the School of Medicine for the past few years in the Center for Compassion, Altruism, Research and Education under Dr. James Doty, about lowering amygdala response, right, which is the fight or flight syndrome, which then can inhibit cortisol release. And by doing that, it's been shown that people can live longer, healthier, happier lives. This is really related to the Blue Zone research. So it's about how we live and where we live to improve happy longevity. And we have to get away rapidly from this idea of assisted living and senior living, because it's anathema to the fact that it takes a village. And by really imagining these communities that are walkable and bikeable and accessible, we really get to a concept that is, it's quite European in many ways, but it's also generic need that people have, which is to connect and have these casual collisions, the cafe, whatever lifestyle, raising children in places where they know where things come from and where they go, and that there's this progression and the story arc in life. We feel that machine learning has a lot to learn about how to teach our children in the right way, and what we can do to impart this knowledge in compassion, altruistic ways. So, changing gears here literally, I'm in Silicon Valley. There's probably 25 or more different level companies, size companies, doing level 5 autonomous work in terms of transit. So, honestly, within the next 10 years or sooner, this is going to be ubiquitous. It's going to be everywhere. So there's no reason to be designing and planning communities with cars and driveways. We need to be considering mobility as a service and this notion where car-free actually feels safer, because it is safer, and it feels nicer because it is nicer. And any community in the world that is really thinking these ways and implementing these things, if you've been to these places, you know already that you don't have to keep looking behind your back as to what's coming. You just stroll and feel good and all the rest of that. This is a really, really big topic, which is the fact that because of COVID, because of disruptions to global supply chains, because of the war instigated by Russia against Ukraine, we're seeing more and more shelves going bare around the world. And we're seeing that supply chains are breaking down. We can't rely anymore on global supply chains. We just can't. We have to be urgently moving towards local, regional kinds of artisanal production, and then using these lovely, drone taxis, drone deliveries to broker and barter, like we used to live actually on Earth, in these lovely agrarian societies and cultures that met sort of in the village square to trade their goods. This actually, we feel, will create nation state security and reduce amygdala response, at the nation state level. Getting to the big picture, funding, finance. We've spent the better part of our journey on Regen Villages, not only raising some capital for our work, but also working on how can we be a steward to open up the floodgates for the right kind of sovereign wealth, pension fund, institutional finance to come into these necessary projects around the world. There's a lot of people in this call who are working on different things. Wouldn't it be great if your land opportunity could actually see some kind of real mezzanine patient debt finance that could support the construction and the development in the right way? And we feel that messaging and being able to provide information dynamically to these asset holders is pretty important. So ESG, which stands for environmental social governance, SDG, which probably everybody knows at this point, those colorful UN tiles on sustainable development goals. There's 17 of them. We think there should be actually several more. But in any case, that imagine you have this dynamic live dashboard literally showing you how your communities are performing. And that is really going to also be game changing for how these folks are investing in these things. They have mandates now to do that. Regen Villages Holding, which is our Dutch holding company, we're part of the EU Commission on Smart Rural Villages, the EU Network for Rural Development, the new EU Bauhaus Roundtable, for whatever that's worth. And also we've been presenting at COP26, COP27 will be at COP28. We are waving the big flag, even though we're relegated to these sort of backroom solution set, breakout areas, but we're still trying to wave a big flag of what's important, what has to get done. It's really important to understand finance and understand that these sovereign wealth and pension funds have a mandate now to invest in these kinds of funnels in terms of ESG and SDG. Moreover, they're making direct residential real estate investments right now in the multiple billions, double digit. Probably will go up to the trillion at some point. And this is really important that they have the knowledge that by matching the carbon targets and the sustainability goals, that these kinds of designs through machine learning can then be connected directly to the right patient mezzanine, junior, senior level debt finance. That is a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's taking the eco-village to the next level, right? To be able to see an industrialized approach, if you can forgive that term, to creating the right kind of infrastructure around the world. And I mentioned before, we went announced ourselves in 2016, excuse me, at the Venice Biennale for architecture. And I thought my phone had broken because we were getting all these emails. Well, we hit this sort of viral nerve in terms of press coverage. New York Times, Guardian, BBC, Reuters, World Economic Forum. And yeah, we've probably got now about 83,000 families who pre-registered through our website. But we also have landowners and governments and whole communities that are interested all around the world. In Europe, in South Africa, we are progressing a 1,200 home self-reliant township near Pretoria. And that's going really, really well in terms of design planning. So we're getting bigger scale as well, which is really, really important to actually prove that we can address social, affordable, urgent housing crisis around the world. Most recently, in Thailand, in a rural area near Chiang Rai, on 650 hectare, potential for 4,000 to 5,000 social affordable homes, working directly with the kingdom there. So, you know, to encapsulate and to sum up and to get to some questions, I hope, essentially being able to inform machine learning models with compassion, altruism, mindfulness, and empathy towards regenerative resiliency in the built environment as quickly as we possibly can. So we can get these kinds of communities designed, approved, paid for, built, and moved into, okay? So I'm grateful for this opportunity, as always, to be part of Rebuild, and happy to take any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, James. What a talk. Amazing, amazing. And so good to hear where you're at. And the journey has been an amazingly important one to start opening these doors, and particularly with municipalities and governments and nation states, to help them understand the benefits. Looking at these AI models that we're discussing and the feedback loops that are being generated, how does that then move out into the wider network of all the different villages as we start to see how the learnings from one village might then improve another? Or are there very few crossovers, for example, with topography, climate, and other aspects?
It's such a great question, and that again is the power of machine learning, and this whole idea of these iterative loops and cycles. First and foremost is the human interventions. You know, the fact that people are involved, stakeholders are involved in toggling the objectives, and the software, of course, is learning about what people's needs are and from their different perspectives. That's really important. It's not just the real estate developer's perspective or the government's perspective or a landowner's perspective, but it's being able to broker and understand all of those perspectives and then learn from it. In the same way that once a village is built, that the software can continue to look at itself and imagine itself to how it can improve, how can it get better. But then it takes that back into the design cycle, so that when we look at the next village design, it's taking that wisdom and imparting it back into that new design. So it's a fractal. It's just continuously flowing and evolving. That's really the exciting part of what I feel like the things that we don't even know yet, we're going to learn from this.
Amazing. Thank you. Maybe we can open it up to the audience if anybody would like to put their hand up and ask a question. Mark, how do you feel about jumping in, just unmuting?
I feel great about jumping in, except excuse my voice. I'm recovering from a little laryngitis, so I've got that whiskey blues singer kind of thing happening today. James, thank you. So good seeing you, and the progress that you're making. The real question I have, and you and I both have been, in the regenerative space for a while, is how do we move this, say, machine learning into connecting all of the stakeholders and their various interests in regenerative communities, regenerative systems, regenerative economy. With money being such a large motivator, how have you been able to get more money, credit enhancement, grants, lower interest rates into the regenerative projects, and also create compelling returns for investors so that more of this money that is actually out there is actually flowing into projects?
Well, it's a great question, and to be perfectly painfully honest, we haven't yet. You want to see the brick marks on my forehead? They're there. We've modeled these things, and we're modeling these things, and we know that it works, and we've created demand. We know there's demand. So we, in many ways, and I'm really happy about this, is that we've inspired a lot of projects around the world because of that demand. We've inspired agrihoods. That term didn't exist 10 years ago. right? So, and it's not about me, taking credit for any of it. I say often that I stand on the shoulders of those other folks like Rudolf Steiner and Bucky Fuller and Bill Mollison and the like. I'm a vessel, right? We're a vessel. And we want to see the machine learning software also be a vessel to see these kinds of neighborhoods get built rapidly, urgently around the world, especially in the global south, where the next 2 billion people are coming to Earth, hundreds of millions of people are moving into the middle class. If they want the typical American or European style subdivision, the planet is dead. But if we can offer them a new moniker for middle class living, quote unquote, that is regenerative and resilient, then we feel like we have a fighting chance, especially to start looking at the rural areas, like for instance, rural India and sub-Saharan Africa and across ASEAN, that these areas can all of a sudden be reinvigorated and invite those people back from those rings of poverty surrounding urban areas to come home to their rural ancestral land and feel like they have a place that they can thrive. That's the reason why we have climate migration, and the reason why we have so much poverty is because people left where they could subsist and went to places where they couldn't. So we want to see how that can happen. But we really are, and I'm sure anybody who's known me, excuse me, or us over the years knows, is that we are really focused on how to tease out the current economic folks into this thinking. And that's really a challenge, but we feel like we are making progress and we are getting closer every day. So yeah, that's, I think the best way I can answer the question is we're trying hard.
Well, my vessel would like to collaborate with your vessel to make it happen faster. Let's
Thanks, Mark. We've got a few more questions.
Thank you.
We got Frank, and then Kelly, and then Sam, and then Alexandra. Frank.
All right, thank you. James, very inspiring. Pushes a lot of buttons in my head. So super. First, a technical question. You're talking about machine learning, and with machine learning, I think about data sets and feedback loops. How is that organized? Because you talked a little bit about the input data, but you have the initial, but you also have the feedback loop, of course. Okay, what happens after you start the project, for example, and how do you learn from that? So I imagine a network of sensors and feedback of the inhabitants, probably. Could you elaborate a bit on that? Maybe it is a bit more about infrastructure feedback loops rather than necessarily monitoring people, right? Because we're really sensitive. I hear your Dutch accent there. Yes. So we are a European, we're a Netherlands-based company, right? So we're really preoccupied with privacy and focusing on generic values of things. So how do you take a real-world model and then make it synthetic, number one. Number two, you take that synthetic generic values, and then you can iterate on that. By way of example, we can look at the geospatial layers, which I showed. But then there's a set of kit of parts, we call it. The kit of parts is essentially logical, passive home infrastructure, housing that connects to that particular piece of land in that climate zone. But essentially, once we understand the capabilities of the passive home for that climate zone, the values are converted into generic language that the Village OS software can more easily relate to, and then the algorithms can make more broader suggestions on. But then on the operational model, we're talking about that, which I think is an important piece. It's about the layer of both sensors and creating the right kind of sensor network. Sensors, by the way, are coming down dramatically in cost. They're going up tremendously in their efficiency. A lot of new sensors are coming out that are self-powered. Some are even biological sensors that can, at the moment of sensing something, can actually create an intervention or actuate something, and then are somewhat alive, if you will. And that's really exciting. And then, of course, there are the platforms and systems and services. So you've got companies like Schneider Electric, Bosch, Siemens, whoever it may be. They have systems and services. 10 years ago, they didn't have application program interfaces. They didn't have APIs to talk to their components. Now they do, and many of them actually, you can not only learn from them, but you can actually get involved in actuating things. So that's how we look at being able to create a system that can be learning and also eventually have interventions to be able to control things.
Right.
Autonomously.
A lot of data. A lot of data that is.
Thanks, Mike. We're going to move on and see if we can get the last few questions in nice and
I'll
quick.
try to make my answer shorter too. Sorry.
Thank you. Great. Okay. So are you planning to use any sustainable materials with a building method such as hempcrete, bioceramic, or shipping containers?
Yes. Yes to hempcrete, absolutely. To bamboo, to new kinds of aggregates that are taking carbon out of the air. I'm not a big shipping container person. However, we are agnostic, so I'm not dogmatic. Answer to that
Thank you.
question.
Sam, do you want to see if you can ask a concise question?
Yeah, just a quick one. Always energized to hear you speak, James. Thanks so much. Two questions on the investment side of things. I think last time I got a chance to speak with you, you're trying to raise from, a larger investor. I'm curious if you're considering crowdfunding, why or why not? Because there's so much demand, and just also how can somebody help who really wants to be involved and help see this vision through?
I put my email right here into chat, so if anyone who wants to reach out to me can. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we're currently raising a Series A round. We've got some good irons in the fire for lead. It's a €5 million lead investment that will allow us to actually get the Village OS software to an MVP state for our early adopting licensees and partners. And I've been shy about crowdfunding for a long time. Jean-Marc knows this as well, because I feel that in many ways it tells a different story than we want to tell, because what we've been trying to from the very beginning is to try to get to the larger funding sources. How can we transact directly with sovereign wealth and pension funds? How do we get to that point where we can level up? So we feel that certain level of private equity would enable us to do that. Again, I'm not dogmatic. I'm open. Please email me if you have ideas. Happy to talk about that.
And we're going to have one last question from Alexandra. I apologize, Kelly. I forgot to credit you for the previous question. Alexandra asks, do you have any suggestions for architectural technologies that are suitable for northern climates for food production year round?
Yeah, absolutely. There's controlled environment technologies and platforms that are that also use a passive design in the greenhouse, but also can use heat exchange and other things, and biogas to be able to heat. The key issue that the nut you have to crack in, like the Nordics, for instance, is being able to heat the greenhouse year round, the long dark winters, and light them. So you need the ability to generate the right power in a renewable way and that heat in a renewable way. There are systems and services for that, but also don't ignore the long grow season when the light is out and you have those lovely midsummer days and nights. There's opportunities to cultivate, can, store and keep food for the long winter as well. I'm really grateful for this opportunity I know there's other questions in chat. Would love to keep the dialogue going. We're fighting the good fight. And I feel like in this community, we're all in it together. That's what I love about Rebuild. We're all wanting this so desperately and trying to figure out why isn't it happening faster? And so we're trying to, we're beating the drum to, okay, we think technology can help with that. And so that's what we're doing.
I agree. And all of these wonderful experiments are all testing and trying and probing different ways. And thank you for taking the lead. Thank you for inspiring many of us along the way, and particularly in terms of the integration of technology to eco-villages, regenerative spaces, and understanding the benefits of leveraging the type of tech that we're talking about.
Yeah,
So
and Mark,
everybody-
Jean-Marc is putting some things into the chat. As I said, I'm hoping that this dialogue will continue. The people want to reach out and we can talk more, and we can put our heads together collectively on what makes the most sense. We have this opportunity. This is our time right now to make the right difference. So I'm excited. I'm optimistic. I'm that guy who's hopeful.
I love it. Thank you, James.
We end on a high note, as Cloris
It was a
Leachman
great
used
high
to say.
note, really great high note. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your energy. Thank you everybody for joining us and for listening intently and for your wonderful questions. This evening we had a final session that was being cancelled. Unfortunately, the breathwork practitioner has got COVID. I think that's a bit ironic, but sadness. But we're going to say thank you for this evening, this afternoon, this morning, whatever the time is with you. Tomorrow we have the mastermind. There's been a month-long of 4 design sprints for a number of different villages who've all been designing their master plan, their prototype master plans. They'll be pitching. We'll get to vote on them. They'll be winning a prize. The winner will bring the prize. We have village pitches back to back for an hour session in 4 different sessions and 16 villages from around the world. We've got a game to further develop the Village Builder's Handbook, which was a book written last year at Rebuild during a mastermind sprint with 20 people in 10 days. And so that'll be great fun to kind of see the broad breadth of everything within the regenerative village space. And then we have more amazing talks and discussions before our global closing ceremony. So thank you once again, James. Thank you for an amazing talk. This is recorded. We will be sharing it with all participants as well, and for yourself. And yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, great job. Wonderful to be here. Thank you so much.